Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from Innova.Buzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the Innova.Buzz podcast today, all the way from Calgary, Alberta in Canada, although you might be somewhere else at the moment. We'll check that in a moment. Tyler Foley, who's a safety consultant, a speaker, and author of The Power to Speak Naked. Welcome to the Innova.Buzz podcast, Tyler. It's a real privilege to have you as my guest.
Oh, it's my joy, Jürgen. I've been looking forward to this for a while because you are a very popular man. And it is hard to get on your show. So you've been circled on my calendar for a little bit. And yes, I am not currently in Calgary, although I'm still in Alberta. I'm about 3 hours east of the city for work. So thank you for taking the time to allow me onto the show.
And I understand, I was talking to somebody from that area this morning earlier, that it's quite snowy and cold there. So I guess you're probably finding it hard to get out and about.
Yeah, well, the roads are at least dry, but yes, it is quite cold. I had to get out of my vehicle first thing in the morning, and the thermometer said it was minus 20, but it was closer to minus 30 with the wind chill. So
yeah, that is cold. That's really cold. That's centigrade for anybody listening from the US or the UK.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Now, you help speakers find their voice and get on stages to share their message. And one of the things you do quite a bit is get on podcasts to share your message as well. And one of the key messages is the power to speak and get on stages and spread your message. So I'm really looking forward to digging into all of that. Now, before we do that, what's the impact you're making in the world today, Tyler?
Well, I'd like to think I'm helping people share their stories, both as a safety consultant, so that, I built my company Total Buy-in around the idea that stories are what bring us together. And I know from my own personal experience in safety that it's when people come out and they share why safety is important to them or something that's happened to them that they can have real impact. And I've taken that messaging and kind of broadened it to help anyone, first of all, discover that they have a story, because I think that everybody has a story to tell and you have no idea who needs to hear it until you start speaking it. And then helping them tell it effectively and find those platforms so that they can find their audience. So I feel how I'm making the most impact in the world right now.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's a lot to explore there. I mean, you talked about finding the platform, finding the audience, identifying the message, and often we take things for granted in our life, something that's happened to us or an experience that we've had, and we take it for granted. And when we start talking about it, other people kind of get blown away and say, wow, that's thank you for sharing that. That's such a precious gift. And we don't ourselves treat it like that, do we?
Well, and I think it's a symptom of complacency. We are living our life, and because it's, compounded over years and years and years and years, you don't see the incremental change often in what you've done or how you're doing or how you've grown or where you've gotten to. But when you condense it down into that Reader's Digest or the little bullet points and somebody reads out your bio and you're like, wow, I've done some really cool things. I've been on over 350 podcasts in the last year, 400 in the last 18 months. And every time a host will read my bio, I go, that's not too shabby. Good job, Mr. Foley. You're doing okay.
Yes, I've had that experience as well where somebody's read out my bio on a podcast and I think, that sounds pretty good. And yep. I've even made the comment, oh, you make me sound really good.
Yeah, now I have to live up to that.
Yeah. All right. Well, one of the things I wanted to explore with you, and I guess this comes out of the book, The Power to Speak Naked. And that's, just for people that might not be familiar with that book, it's kind of a metaphor. It's kind of like getting up on stage and being yourself and being authentic and having the courage to kind of share openly whatever's going on, right? What I wanted to explore with you, because a lot of people say, well, the thing we're most afraid of even more than death is public speaking. And yet you said on a podcast that I listened to, it's not public speaking we're afraid of, it's public embarrassment. And it occurred to me that it may even be a step worse than that. It's almost like public shame. So if we're embarrassed in public or ashamed of that. So talk to us a little bit more about that differentiation and how we can perhaps turn that around so that we say, well, who cares whether we embarrass ourselves? Because embarrassing yourself in public is not really a big deal depending on what it is. And yet we kind of make it a big deal, don't we?
Yeah, well, and really what it is, it's a fear of public judgment. So whether you feel embarrassed or you feel ashamed or you feel attacked, whatever kind of descriptor you want to put with that, it's about public judgment. So I'm going to say a statement, and now it's out in the world for somebody to hear, and I don't know how it's going to be perceived. And so to avoid any of the negative perceptions that may come from it, I'm just not going to speak at all. And that's why I often say that, as you had heard, we're not afraid of public speaking. It's the public judgment that we're afraid of. And you've probably heard me say, the proof of this is if we really truly were afraid of public speaking or using our voice in public, commerce as we know it would collapse. If anybody's ever been to a restaurant and ordered food, you've spoken in public. The difference is, right? People aren't looking at you, so you're not being judged for ordering your pancakes at Denny's. But if you have an audience where people are looking at you, there's this fear that, again, what we say will be misunderstood or perceived incorrectly. And so it's safer to just not speak. And I would challenge that to say that most people are on your side as a speaker, because most people, as you pointed out, are terrified to do it. So they want that person on stage to succeed. They want them to enlighten them, because A, then they don't have to be the one speaking, and so they're off the hook. But B, we don't show up to events or presentations or even entertainment hoping that it's going to be awful. We go with this expectation that it's going to be good. Yeah. And, even right now, nobody sat down to our conversation. Nobody started listening or watching this and think to themselves, man, I hope whoever Jürgen brings on today is going to be awful. I hope I hope I get no value out of this. I hope this person actually sucks really bad. Right? Like they didn't think that.
No,
they just simply wouldn't have tuned in. So the audience is on your side, and this notion of judgment or this negative perception that you're going to receive just simply isn't the case. As long as you do the thing that you were supposed to do, and that is leave your audience better than you found them. And that can be leaving them with one takeaway or providing them with a tool or a resource that improves them. And it just needs to be one thing, and it just needs to be one audience member. You don't need to change the whole room. As long as one person walked away slightly better than you left them, you've done your job.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One of the things that I'd add to what you said there in terms of people don't want you to fail is that when we get on stage to present, we're the ones that, like, I'm the one that thinks the most about how am I going to appear. Nobody else is really cares about that. They're not giving that any thought at all. They're just thinking, what am I going to get out of this presentation?
Yeah.
So if I can reframe my approach, not, I wonder what they're going to think of me, to what am I going to give the audience?
Yes.
And have the confidence also. I tell a lot of people, one of the things I come down really hard on feedback when I'm giving feedback to people who present is when they start off with, I'm sorry, I haven't rehearsed this enough, or I'm sorry, I'm really nervous. Yeah. And I say, do not start with an apology. Never apologize for getting up on stage, because what you're about to do is give a gift to your audience.
Yeah.
and you don't have to apologize for that.
No. And if you have been asked to present, or even if you have decided that you're going to present, you are the expert. That people have come because nobody else knew more about that particular subject for that particular group than you did. Even if there's other people who have done it bigger, faster, stronger, brighter, taller, longer, you are that person who was asked, because we don't ask second best, we ask the best. So you were the best in your company, you were the best in your town, you were the best in your city, province, country, state, and if you have that audience, that platform, you were the expert that was asked for a reason. So you got to embrace that. And as you said, don't apologize, because really, honestly, speaking from your heart is probably one of the best things that you can do. And I think most people, when they get nervous, it's because they're, it's particularly when they say that statement, I didn't practice enough, or I, don't know this thing. It's because they spent too much time trying to memorize something that wasn't going to be helpful for their audience. Mm. And that is, they were trying to memorize a script.
Yeah.
Like you and I are having a conversation right now. I didn't take 2, 3, 4 days or weeks or months memorizing what you and I were going to talk about. I am an expert in public speaking. I have a background in performing arts for the last 36 years. I've been on stage most of my life. 6 years old was the first time I was in front of an audience. I've written 2 best-selling books now, right? So I don't need to study my material. I know my material. And I acknowledge that there are people who know more about the industry than I do, but that's not the people that need to hear my message. Seasoned vets of public speaking probably listen to me and go, oh yeah, I know that. Every once in a while, they glean something new or interesting, but for the most part, they know. I'm really good friends with Bob Cattell. Me and him do a lot of events together. He's the memory guy. Really, really good speaker. In my opinion, one of the most underrated public speakers in our industry right now. And we were sitting backstage at an event in May, and he picked up a copy of my book and started thumbing through it. And he reads really fast. He's a really, really he's got speed reading down to a thing. And he gets to one of the chapters. He goes, "Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of that before." This is a man who I study and try to learn from. And he's like, "Yeah, that's a good point." So you never know what insight that you will have, or maybe you word something differently. So if you've been asked to present, you are the expert, and you've got to embrace that.
And also take the opportunity to be in the spotlight and celebrate that. Allow yourself to celebrate that, because coming back to this idea of starting off with the apology, because I also tell people what you're saying to yourself, the self-talk in that is, this is not going to be good enough.
Yeah. And you'd alluded to a really good point too. Like, you are providing your audience with a gift. And when we're doing that negative self-talk, that's very ego-driven, and it's very centric to the self, right? What if I do this, or what if I don't do that, or what if they think, right? Where if you look at your audience, first of all, as a gift to you, because they are, right? Yeah. They're there to learn from you. You could be speaking to empty chairs, and that sucks. So if you have people to present to, even if it's just 2, you've got a good audience, right? But further to that, if you focus on how do I serve them, it's really, you got to focus on one thing or the other. So you can either be self-centered and focused inward on you, which is very ego-driven, or you can be a service mentality. How can I serve my audience? Because they are here to be left better than I found them. And if you can do that, if you can find a way to tune into what their needs are, it's really hard to concentrate and be nervous and think about all of the me, what ifs, if all you're focused on is, how do I leave this audience better than I found them?
Yeah, that's a really important point. And I'd like to explore that a little bit more, because obviously, if you're going in to give a speech somewhere, it's good to know who's the audience going to be, what do they need, what are their interests, and so on, and tailor your presentation to meet that. But in terms of then being up on stage, how do you kind of release all that self-focus enough to observe the audience in a way that you can see, okay, that joke didn't resonate? I mean, that's the obvious one, if you're a comedian and you crack a joke and you don't get the response, nobody laughs at the joke. So, okay, they didn't like that sort of joke, so you adapt. Now, how do you do that throughout the whole speech in terms of, okay, I'm going to tell a story that's supposed to really get everybody emotional because it's an impactful story, and how do you be so aware that you can observe, is it having the impact that I want, or do I adapt my presentation?
Well, I think the first thing to recognize is, and Les Brown says it better than I, so let's quote Les, you never tell a story without a point, and you never make a point without a story. So when we're telling the stories, we need to know why we're telling that story. And we need to know who our audience is so that we know how to tell that story effectively for that audience, because your audience will change. For example, for me, when I'm presenting safety talks, my audience is typically very blue collar, workers. They're usually rough and tough, tired of safety, don't like safety guys, because safety guys just get in the way and make things slow and make them have to do more paperwork than necessary. And, so I know who my audience is there. When I'm presenting keynotes, I'm typically presenting to C-level suites who want to know more about safety, how to engage somebody who feels the way that I just explained. So I will tell the same story to both audiences, but I will change my language and how I do it, because the language will inform how somebody perceives that story that I'm telling. And oftentimes the reason I'm telling the story is different. So for the C-suite, I'm trying to exemplify behaviors that need to be done, where for the blue collar guys, I'm trying to entertain them and get them to see me in a different light and not just as a safety professional. It's still the same story. Being on a film set, jumping 6 stories out of windows, being the safest job that I ever had. And but how I tell it is different, and my point for telling it is different, right? My point for the C-suite is information. The point for the blue collar is entertainment and camaraderie and a showing of like and kinship. So being able to really hone in on who your audience is and why your audience is there, what the expectation is of you, and then how to bring that forward, that's going to be the real key to at least keeping them entertained and or at least keeping their attention anyways.
Okay, that's interesting. So with a story like that, I mean, that's a great example where you've got the same story, but different reasons and a different emphasis and different way to present it to those different audiences, because there's a different effect that you're after. How do we first of all identify a story that's going to be a good metaphor for the message that we want to give? How do we then build it in a way that's, first of all, it's compelling, entertaining, and at the same time teaches the lesson that we want to convey?
So the first part, because there's a lot to unpack with that, so let's jump into that. The first one, how do we identify our stories? The stories can change and can evolve. Sometimes you'll be asked a question on the fly where you're like, oh, I know this thing. It's not a rehearsed one, but I know this thing and it relates. Let's tell that story. Again, it's really important to know why I'm telling that story. So you have to be very clear. Somebody asked this. It reminded me of this situation that I have been through. It relates to this because, and bring it full circle. So you tell your story. oh, I heard that. Well, this is something that I experienced, or this is one of these things that, let me walk you through it. And so now you can see how that's an example of whatever you've just discussed. But if you want to have a mainstay, if you like, for me, if you're going to be a presenter where you're going to have keynote presentations, or you're going to start building a career as a professional speaker, one of the tricks that I do with all of my clients, and this is something that anybody who's listening or watching right now, you can do it. It'll take 2 minutes. Hit pause right now. Go grab yourself a pen, paper, come back. Jurgen and I'll wait. You'll be fine. Hit pause. Now that you're back, you've got your pen and your paper. What I want you to do is I want you to take your age, however old you are, and round up or down to the nearest 5. So for me, I'm 43 years old. I'm going to round up to 45. Last year when I was 42, I was going to round down to 40. So now that I'm 45 years old, I'm going to take that and divide by 5. So whatever number you rounded up or down to, your nearest 5, take that number and divide by 5. Whatever number you have now, those are the increments or time periods that you're going to have. So we've just divided your life into 5 equal time periods. When I do this, 43 rounds up to 45. 45 divided by 5 is 9. So I'm going to look at 9-year increments within my life. So my first time period, 0 to 9 years old. Now I'm going to ask myself, what is the most significant memory that I have from this time period? And I just want you to write it down. First thing that comes to mind. And it's important that it's the first thing that comes to mind, because that's the one that is the most prevalent. That's the one that has the most impact on you, because obviously that's the one that comes first. You know, if I think back to 0 to 9, I instantly go to 6-year-old Tyler. And the first memory that I have from 6-year-old Tyler, the one that springs to mind every time I do this, is me on stage in my elementary school Christmas pageant playing Joseph as part of a nativity with my best friend Lisa, who was playing Mary, and the sound of laughter that I got when the 3 wise men came with their period appropriate wrapped gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh in like wrapping paper, because obviously that's what would have happened. And they gave me these presents, and I, being 6 years old in my bathrobe, set them down on the manger where baby Jesus was lying, right down on baby Jesus's head. And all 3 presents went right there, smothering poor baby Jesus, and everybody laughed, right? The whole audience just erupted, and I couldn't figure it out. That, you know, the first one, there was kind of a little bit of a chuckle, and then the second one, there was a bigger laugh, and when I put the third one, I remember watching my mom just roll over, tears in her eyes, crying. She was so happy. Just, you know, full belly laugh. And just that feeling, that exhilaration that came with it, that was so joyful for me. And seeing my mom and my dad just light up, like just the pride that was in them, and the feeling that came through the room too. Like, it's hard to describe until you've actually been on stage and felt an audience laugh along with you. And then the feeling too, like just after that, we got a standing ovation. So everybody there cheered, and there's just this energy that runs through you when that happens. I'll never forget it. It's it's one of my most distinct memories. So I want you to go through and just write down for each one of these time periods, what is your most significant memory? You know, for me, the next time period is 10 to 19 or 10 to 18. Either way, it's I focus in on being 17 years old, waking up New Year's Day after being the DD for my friends, New Year's Eve, being up very late, getting everybody home safely, going to bed about 4:30 in the morning, waking up around 10:30, 11 to the smell of bacon because my mom was cooking breakfast, and trying to get up the stairs and having a real difficult time, and then trying to brush my teeth and having no ability to keep the toothpaste in my mouth because I'd woken up and the left side of my body was paralyzed. And it took about a good 20 to 25 minutes for me to realize that things were not right. Even my mom, she was like, "What's wrong with you? Are you drunk?" I was like, "No, I was the DT, Mom. I don't drink." She's like, "Come on now." I'm like, "No, really." But then, she was really concerned. She could see it just in my response, the way that I was talking to her, that something was wrong. We ended up going to the hospital, and I was paralyzed for over a year, had to withdraw from my the production that I was in. I didn't actually get to graduate from my fine arts high school because I couldn't do that production. I had to go and get my GED. A lot of these things, I look back to that moment. So that's a very impactful moment for me. We will all have these moments in our lives. So divide your life by 5. Look at what the most significant memory from each time period is. And remember that it doesn't have to be this vivid pictured imagining. It could be a sound. It could be a smell. It could be a feeling. Could be a color. But know what the situation is around it. And that will give you at least 5 stories that you can tell. Now, the next step, we can't do chatting here amongst you and me right now. We can't, this is homework for our listeners. So if you've done this exercise and you've broken your life into the 5 and you've got 5 memories that are for sure top of mind, the next exploration is why. Why those memories? Why are they so significant to you? What do they mean? Are they positive memories or are they negative memories? Or are they neither? Are they just memories? Can you see the positive and the negative of it? Can you explore both of those? And that's when those lessons start to come out. So why is it important to you? And then the next exploration after you've explored that why is, what are the lessons that I learned from that? What are the lessons that I needed to learn from that? What did I already know going into it? What did I take away from it? And now what can my audience learn from this story? Because again, we're not telling the story without a point, and we're not making a point without a story. So the whole point of the stories, including the ones that I just told, is to educate your audience and to get them to see your thought pattern, your process, how you developed this way of thinking, to then try to get them to adopt or adapt to that. And so that's where that exploration can take days, weeks, months, years. I constantly am revisiting my stories. Wondering.
I was just going to say revisit often.
Yeah. And especially because, as my audiences change and as my audience grows and as my audience adapts as well to my delivery, I need to change and I need to do a little bit more work into why is this important. And honestly, it's a really fun exploration. And so that's how you find those stories so that you can tell those points. And those are the ones that you're going to rehearse. Those are the ones that you're going to know inside out. But you can do this on the fly. If you've done this enough, it becomes muscle memory. So if somebody asks you something that is not part of your prepped repertoire, you can still go, oh, well, you know what? This happened to me last week. I had this thing, and this is what I experienced. And you can still start to tell that. Now,
that raises an interesting point, because basically what you've just outlined there in those last few sentences is a conversation that we all probably have every single day, where somebody will give you a prompt of some sort, and the response will be, oh, that reminds me of the time, and you start telling a story.
Yes. And now that leads us to the second part of your question. And I realized that there was 2 questions. Go back, listen, rewind. It was like 8 minutes ago, and then I went on a rant. But go rewind, and then you'll know that there was a second question there, and that was, now how do we tell these stories to keep our audience engaged? Because it's one thing to identify it. It's another thing to know why we're going to tell it to them. It's another thing to tell it in a way that they go, oh, yeah. And the secret to that is, and where I see most speakers, both amateur and professionals, get this wrong, is when we're speaking from an ego-driven standpoint, it's very easy for us to want to be the heroes of our own story. And if you break it down using the hero's journey model that Joseph Campbell put together, you have a hero who is in a state of stasis or unaware until they are thrust into crisis by some catalyst event that then sends them on the journey where they initially meet a hero, or they meet a mentor or a guide who then, or the sage, and the sage shows them various lessons along the way so they can go through these trials and tribulations before they meet their final nemesis and overcome before they progress onto their journey home. And, whether you're talking Star Wars or you're talking Harry Potter or you're talking any modern or fabled classic, right down to Homer's Odyssey, they all follow this same pattern. And where most people try to do and where they fail in gathering their audience.
They want to be the hero.
They want to be the hero, right? I'm the hero. I slayed the dragon. Nobody cares. Because everybody in the audience is the hero of their own story.
Yeah.
So if you want to tell the story effectively and have your audience lean in and be engaged, it's really important to remember you're not the hero. You're the sage. You're the mentor. You're Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're Dumbledore. You are Gandalf. You are the one that is going to lead the hobbits along this journey so that they can finally get to Mordor and defeat Sauron, or pick your nemesis, right?
That's
Darth
right.
Vader, right?
Yeah.
So you need to take on that sage mentor guide. I have experienced this from my worldly ways, and I want to now give you this gift of my knowledge. I want to pass it along. And so that you, the hero, can overcome your nemesis, whatever it is. And that's how you're going to get your audience to lean in, to really be interested, because you're giving them that information so that they can continue to be the hero, that they can fight the good fight and get to the next level. And that's the key to a really effective story.
Love it. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the hero's journey, the Joseph Campbell work, and looked at a whole lot of unusual stories that they're not unusual because they follow the hero's journey, but they're not ones that commonly are brought up in that conversation. And I love to analyze those because nobody else has done it. Okay, who's the mentor here, and when do they do the different steps of the hero's journey? Yeah. All right. Well, this is absolutely fantastic. We could go on for ages here. I'm just sort of aware of my clock that's running here and has turned orange.
Yes.
So, I think it's a good point to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round, the same 5 questions I ask of every guest. And it's we'll get some insightful answers that'll inspire the audience, hopefully, to do some more awesome beyond what you've already shared with us.
I'm looking. This is why it's circled on my calendar. This is why I've been ready for this.
Excellent. All right. What's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative? In my opinion, I think the number one thing people need to do to be more innovative is the same thing they need to do to be more comfortable speaking, and that is to just do and stop worrying about the judgment. I think every time, I've had different versions of this question. And by the way, I like the way you ask it better. But I always think of Edison and the light bulb, right? I came up with 1,000 ways to not make a light bulb. Yeah. That rapid, I remember being at Date with Destiny with Tony Robbins and hearing him talk about rapid failure. And I was like, yes, just embrace it. If you want to be innovative, you cannot be afraid of failure, and you can't be afraid of judgment. You got to go and knowing that everything is going to be a lesson. You're either going to get it right or you're going to figure out how to get it right by doing. That's such a powerful bit of advice. Yeah. And I think of it sometimes as an experiment based on my scientific background. So you have a postulate, you run an experiment without expectation of what the outcome will be, although you've postulated what you're expecting the outcome, but you're not wedded to that outcome. And if it doesn't turn out that way, well, then that's the result. You have a look at that result. What does that mean, this result that you've got? And okay, what's the next postulate? What's the next experiment?
Yeah, and I learned that lesson early on. 4th grade, I did science experiment, right? You go in and you do the I can't even remember what, the science fair. And a friend of mine, Jarnell Arca, his parents were lab technicians. And so we had access to all this really, really fancy lab equipment. And we were going to see what made nails rust. And we had like tap water and distilled water and rainwater. And I can't remember what other kind of water. And then we took all these different nails, galvanized and whatever. And we had this hypothesis. And I thought that the distilled water, being pure, would have the most effect on the rust. And the reality was it was the impure ones that had all the various chemicals and everything that just degraded the nails. And being like, that was interesting. My hypothesis was wrong. But again, it didn't matter. There was no consequence to it, right?
Yeah.
Science fair, you're experimenting. We wrote the really pretty report and did it. And the funny thing is we actually came in second place in the science fair to a group of girls who did the exact same experiment, only they did it with 2 types of water and 2 types of nails instead of 4 types of water and 4 types of nails. And they didn't have the fancy like we measured the weight of the rust, like down to the micrograms. How much did this rust produce? And they just looked at the nails and went, that one is rustier and that one is not. And they won because it was simple. Yeah. Right. It was grade 4, simple. We made it way too complex, but again, there was no consequence to it. So don't worry about the failure. Jump in, learn. You will always learn. As long as you're learning, you haven't failed. It's when you fail to learn that you failed.
Excellent. All right. Now, what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
Trusted my gut for one, and I've never been afraid to be the stupidest person in the room. In fact, I've embraced it often. And it's unbelievable to me when I surround myself with really smart people, how incredibly inspired you get watching them work. And one of the other reasons why I wanted to come on this show, because I've been listening to you for a little bit, and I knew I was going to learn something coming on the show, being around Dr. Juergen, So it's important to me to surround myself with, and not just the people who are smarter than me, but people who have different opinions than me, and without judgment. And that's when the innovation comes, because people will see different things different ways. Yeah. And if you can start to learn to see the world the way somebody else does, it's amazing how just incredibly large this world becomes. And there's so much to learn, so much to do, so much that is possible. But it takes stepping outside of your box and your own viewpoint. And so, I like to surround myself with people who are smarter than me, or at least who have a different opinion than me, and then explore it in a very, very childlike way. I love, one of the greatest gifts that I got was having my daughter later in life. I was 35 when she was born. She's, 7 turning 8 now. And, to be able to re-explore the world through her eyes, what a gift. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that rediscovering that childlike curiosity, which it sounds like you've got it, but we can certainly learn that from young kids and refresh that. Yeah. One of the things that from those 2 answers I thought of as well, which I think is important to bear in mind, and that's the idea that what somebody else thinks of me is none of my business. So, and if you take that approach, it's kind of like removes the ego as well, doesn't it? It applies to what we were talking about earlier. Yeah. Yeah. And it really, not only is it none of your business, it really doesn't matter. Yeah, that's right. And ultimately it's irrelevant to the equation. So I love to surround myself and just be curious.
All right. Do you have a favorite resource you use most often?
Right now, Podmatch is it's my go-to for finding amazing people to talk with, and then finding an ability to serve an audience. As a speaker, that's what I have to do. I am numb without an audience. What do I do? What do I do if I don't have people to speak to? And so Podmatch has been my my most trusted resource right now. That is, of all of the tools that I have in my toolkit, it is the one that I'm using the most. I'm probably on Podmatch 4 to 5 times a day, checking through 24 to 30 matches a day. doing 2 to 3 shows a day. Like it is a full-time vocation for me right now. And I just absolutely
Sounds like
love
it.
it.
Well, I think you're the number one, what are they, what's the measure? The number one user
Number one. Yeah. Number one ranked guest on Podmatch, and have been actually for the last 18 months. Now I'm not number one right now, but I'm the only guest on the Podmatch platform that has been in the top 10 consistently for 18 months straight. Everybody else will pop up like, there's some really cool guys. There's a guy right now, Vinny, who I believe is number one right now. Really, really cool guests that have reached the number one spot. I've actually coached 4 different people to the number one spot. And they've all gotten there. But I'm the only one who has consistently stayed in the top 10. Everybody gets there and then they drop out. And they get there, they drop out. I'm like the only one who's like, Alex and I are on a first name basis now. Alex is the founder of it. And he's like, Tyler, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just showing up, man. So you got to slow down.
And of course, check out Alex Sanfilippo's episode. I can't remember which episode it was off the top of my head, but he was on the show a little while ago.
Phenomenal human being. I absolutely love him.
Yeah. All right. So there's probably a whole episode we could do on just podcasting and being a guest on podcast and what we can learn from that. But let's move on to the next question in the buzz. We've got a couple to go. What's the best way to keep a client on track when you're working with them?
Well, to keep the best way to keep your client on track is to keep you on track. I like to have accountabilities and milestones so that I know that I'm on track for what needs to be done, which means you're on track for what needs to be done. So I think having that conversation about what your design alliance looks like, what are those key deliverables, and what are the milestones? How are we checking in so that we know that we're actually reaching what we need to do? And so I like to establish those, weigh-in points, and that I find keeps me on track. And if I'm on track, then I can keep my clients on track.
Excellent. I love it. Sort of look in the mirror first and do the work on yourself first. And then naturally the client will be in alignment with you, in rapport with you. All right. And finally, what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
Be them, learn their story.
Yeah.
Like, you don't try to be somebody else. And, there's nothing wrong with replicating processes or duplicating things that you've seen other successful people work. If you want to do that, why reinvent the wheel? But at the same time, why do you buy Michelin over Firestone or Goodyear, right? You need to be your own brand. Just because we're all tires doesn't mean that we have to be, maybe you're a white wall. Who knows? Right? Like, so you need to know what your story is, and that will help you, first of all. Never mind trying to stand out and brand yourself or any of the rest of that. The key to being really confident in what you're doing and find that innovation is to have that self-worth and that self-confidence. So I think it's really important to know your story, know who you are, to be able to stand in your own power, your own skin, and just be confident being you. And if you can be confident being you going through the world, the rest of it just kind of falls into place.
Yeah, so much gold in that answer. And it reminds me of a conversation I had this morning, actually the same conversation about the snow, but it was about personal branding and the danger of people pursuing personal branding, because it comes back to what you were saying earlier, that they're trying to make themselves the hero in that personal branding, and to remove that and forget about being the hero is really important. And the other thing what you said there, and I think this is really worth highlighting, that's modeling off other people, but in a way that you're not copying them. You're not trying to be them, because you can't be them.
Well, exactly that. You can only be you. And I remember reading the 5 a.m. Club and being like, oh, that seems interesting, but I've never been a 5 a.m. person. And I, went and I was like, well, so what is the whole point of this, right? Now you get up and you have the time to yourself to do the things that need to be done, where it's just you time and you focus. And this person is doing it at 5 a.m. Why? I can do that at 2:00 at night.
Yeah.
And I particularly being somebody who grew up in the fine arts and who grew up in the theater, my working hours started around 5 p.m. It was very common for me to not get home or go to bed until 2:00, 3:00 in the morning. And that was early on. That was like 6, 7, 8 years old. And then I would sleep until noon, and then I would get along with my day. And even in my late teens and early 20s, when I was working, I was doing night shifts. So like I was often, I would gravitate to those things. So that's how my biorhythms have adapted. And so that's how I've structured my day. I stay up to get my daughter to school and, get her to the bus. And then I sleep.
Yeah.
I sleep because my daughter's in school, my wife's at work. That is time where the house is the most quiet. And then I wake up and I pick up my daughter and I get food ready for my wife and us. And then me and my wife get my daughter into the shower and into bed. And then we have our time together, and then she goes to bed. And then I have all of this uninterrupted time where the phone doesn't ring and I don't have to deal with people and I don't have to do the stuff, and I can schedule in my podcast and I can have these great conversations. And then when this is done, I can focus and concentrate on the things that I need to get done. So I have a 5 a.m. club, but 5 a.m. is when I'm wrapping up my day and going to bed.
Yeah. Yeah. So just adapt things to your own style and your own needs.
Take what works for you and slough the rest off.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, thanks, Tyler. This has been fabulous. Now, where can people find out more about you, about the work you're doing, get a hold of your book, and maybe you've even got something for us?
Oh yeah, no, I've got, of course, I got good stuff for the Innova.Buzz audience, but I again want to thank you for having me on the show. And I think it's important that if your audience is coming back and they're listening to this regularly, before I give them free stuff, you've been giving them stuff for years. And that is the gift of having these experts come on to help augment your message, to help your audience grow. And if they're regularly tuning in, if they're listening to the Innova.Buzz podcast, and they're regularly getting value out of it, I would ask that they give you a gift of a 5-star review. Say why they come back and they listen to the show. What is their favorite episode? What was the best takeaway? What was their favorite answers in the 5 questions? What is really something that they've enjoyed with it? And if they can do that for you as a thank you from me, because that's helping everybody. That's helping them get better content, because now you'll know what they like and you can tailor the show to help that. That's helping you, because 5-star reviews is how you're going to grow your audience, so that people find the show, so that more people can hear it. And it helps me, because if you're a popular show and people are giving 5-star reviews, somebody's going to listen to this episode and then maybe I'll sell some books. And I like that. So it helps us all if they can give you a 5-star review. So as a thank you from me, if they do that, I would welcome them to come over to my website, which is SeanTylerFoley.com. And Sean is spelled the proper Irish way, SeanTylerFoley.com. And on there, on the main page, is an invitation to my Endless Stages Facebook group. And there I go live every Tuesday and give a live 20-minute training presentation on whatever happens to be popular in the group that day. And additionally, if they come through my website to get to that, instead of just searching for it on Mr. Zuckerberg's platform, if they come through my platform, and sign up for the Endless Stages Facebook group. They will also get a free copy of my book, The Power to Speak Naked, in PDF format. So you don't have to go to the bookstore and buy it. I'm going to give it to you free. Then if you want to have a copy, we'll tell you how to get it later. But at least this way you have a free copy. You can check it out, see if you like it. And I will give you access to my Drop the Mic speaker training series, which we give to all of our Endless Stages members. So you'll get the book, you'll get the video training, and you'll get access to my live training every Tuesday. And access to the membership at large with Endless Stages. It's a really supportive community of like-minded people who are trying to get up on stage and learn to grow. And so it's a really good growth-minded community of people who are learning to public speak. All of that is available to people who come over to SeanTylerFoley.com, but only if they give a 5-star review. No 5-star review, no book for you.
Excellent. Well, that's very generous, Tyler. And there's clearly a lot of value there. So we'll have the links in the show notes, and we'll expect lots of 5-star reviews out of this episode.
Yes.
Excellent. Now, other than the 5-star review and then jumping into your community and downloading a PDF copy of the book, what action would you like the listener to take away from today's conversation?
Well, we already talked about the storytelling method. So really, honestly, go back and listen to that. Take those couple of minutes to just find what your story is and then play, have fun with it. Really do a deep dive and ask yourself, why are these memories so important to me? Why are they significant? Why do they stand out? What can I learn from them? What did I learn from them? And what can an audience learn from them? And you'd be surprised at just how impactful those stories can be. I really honestly can't stress it enough. You have no idea who needs to hear your story until you tell it. You have no idea the impact that it could have. And if it's only just one person, if you change one person's life, you changed a life. So practice it, rehearse it, find what your stories are, get them out into the world, because you don't know who needs to hear it.
Exactly. That's a very powerful message. And it reminds me, I gave a speech recently, and one of the audience members came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, I didn't realize other people dealt with that issue too." And, you know, that's the kind of feedback that really warms my heart. And I think, well, you know, I just got up and told a couple of stories and it wasn't a big deal, but there it was, connected with somebody.
It's amazing the number of times I've heard that. It wasn't a big deal, and yet somebody's life was profoundly changed by your no big deal.
Yeah.
So it's no big deal to you, but you don't know how impactful it could be to somebody else until you say it. And so, get out, tell your story, get the message out.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us so generously today. I do need to ask you who else I should get on this show and why.
Well, I have a feeling you've already interviewed him. Was your interview this morning with Robert Riopel?
No, it wasn't.
Okay, well then, because he's from Calgary and he would have been talking about the snow. I would get Robert Riopel on, is phenomenal. Michael Harris is another amazing guest. Andrea Petro, who is just a fireball on the mic. She's just, she's hard to get to contain. Her energy is so big, but if you can get her to focus, her stories are phenomenal. And I could give you a list, probably a couple miles long, but those would be the top 3 that popped in my head right now.
All right. Well, we'll get introductions to them and connect with them, and we might follow up on the rest of the list as well. So thanks so much, Tyler. This has been an absolute blast. I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the stories. I'm sure there's lots of takeaways. I would encourage everybody listening now to pause at the end of this conversation, go and grab a cup of coffee or tea or whatever you feel like right now, then come back and listen again, because I guarantee you that every time you listen to this, there'll be something else that pops up. And also do the exercise, because I know I've got stories that have come about without doing that exercise, but essentially like if I backdated and did that exercise, that was kind of what happened, because I just thought of a time and a story popped in, or experience popped into my mind, and I wrote a story around it and explored, well, what's the lesson in that for me now today, particularly going back to childhood, which is a long time ago for me now. But there are some stories there that if I reflect back on them now, and there'll be things that come up, I wish I knew that then. And there's sort of the lessons that come up. So I really encourage everyone to go through that exercise that Tyler outlined today. Enjoy the conversation. Thanks a lot, Tyler. Really enjoyed it myself, and please do stay in touch.